I mentioned before that we're lucky in the United States that it's a relatively open society with regard to secret documents. Nowhere near enough, but by comparative standards. So we have just a mine of documents that have been declassified, either by the government or by exposure. When you look through these documents, what you find is that almost nothing is concerned with security of the population.
Welcome back. This is episode 29 of The Lockdown, the Practical Privacy and Security podcast. Now, you just heard Noam Chomsky talking about how lucky we supposedly are to have an open society where government documents are eventually getting declassified, which is true, but as he points out, when you actually dig through these documents, you very quickly realise that almost nothing in there is actually concerned with protecting you or your privacy. It's all about protecting the government's ability to operate in secrecy. Now, we've heard Edward Snowden talk about this, which seems like forever, so I wanted to give you a different voice. Noam Chomsky has been challenging these power structures for well over half a century now. He's primarily known for how we understand human language and the human mind, but I think what makes him relevant to what we talk about on this show is how relentless he is with his criticisms of systems of control. And he's spent decades pulling this apart from propaganda, surveillance, manipulation, and all these things that shape our daily lives. In fact, in another interview, and I've linked to this in the show notes, he talks about modern advertising, and it wasn't just created to sell products. Had that been the case, a car ad, for example, would be talking about the specifications of the engine, miles to the gallon, that type of thing. But instead, you have a car driving up this windy mountain road, an attractive woman sitting in the passenger seat, having a great time. It's all about creating the expectation of this lifestyle that people think they want. And he goes on to talk about how we, and I put we in quotes there, have managed to create a society where teenagers, for example, would rather spend their weekends walking about a shopping mall than a library or hiking in nature or just doing something actually fulfilling. Now, I think we've actually gone past that stage. I don't think teenagers are in shopping malls these days. That was certainly something they did in the 80s and 90s. And guess what's replaced it? Social media. Social media is the new shopping mall. And it really is the primary method of population control. And we've moved from these physical spaces designed to make us consumers to digital spaces designed to just harvest our attention and data. And his point is still true today. If you look at the most effective advertising methods, is it an ad on a popular TV channel? Or is it a social media influencer saying that they use the product and we should check it out? It's the latter. We see this all the time. Social media is just vying for our attention and controlling our daily lives. I'd say it's more than controlling our daily lives, though. It's those societal expectations shaping society and how we behave and what we think we need to strive for. And I think Noam Chomsky understood very early on whether we're talking about the government surveillance or this corporate manipulation. And the goal is always the same. Keep people distracted, keep us compliant, and more importantly, to keep us predictable. Now, Noam Chomsky is actually still alive today. As I record this show, it's July 4th, 2025, and he's 96 years old. So he's still around, but this clip that I played at the beginning of the show, it must be at least 12 years old, possibly longer. But I believe he's still very vocal about this today, so worth checking out. Okay, on with today's show. Now, the first thing to cover was the Capture the Flag challenge a few weeks ago. This actually went live on June 21st, 2025. It was exactly 12 p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time. And I must say, we had quite the response. There's a lot of hackers listening to this show. So for that, I'm very thankful. Now, I only had 3 prizes to give away. I wish I could have done more. These were 6-month subscriptions to the Try Hack Me platform. And really the goal here is just to expand our knowledge. I don't play video games anymore. Back in the day, not too long ago, I used to love spending my evenings playing video games. Escape from Tarkov, League of Legends, what else? Cyberpunk, all those type of things. Very immersive, they're very good fun. But the big problem of this is productivity. In a way, this is what I'd say this system, in quotes, this is what the system wants us to do, is work hard all day, get home exhausted, and then wind down with a bottle of beer, a microwave meal, and some video games or perhaps some Netflix. Doesn't it keep us in line? Well, I'd like to create and I like to be productive. So most of the things I create and try and be productive about, I like to share on this show. And the Capture the Flag challenge was one of them. And I think there's nothing better than spending an evening or two, not every night, but you should dedicate at least a few evenings a week to sharpening your skills. There's been some reports out there, I'm sure you've seen it, that I don't know the exact figures, but ChatGPT is basically making people more stupid. My spelling has got worse because I rely so much on spell checks. So I'm trying to keep those skills sharp. And I've been using TryHackMe for quite a long time now, as well as Hack the Box. I actually think that's better, but it's a little bit more difficult, less guided. But still, that's another platform that I would recommend. So when I'm not recording this show or writing, then I like to try some ethical hacking, and TryHackMe is the best place for that. Now, I won't call them out by name, but we had 3 winners that provided a very detailed explanation, which I can share with you now. Now, if you don't want to hear, then you might want to mute this part, come back in 2 minutes. So the challenge goes like this. You go to my website, psysecure.com, that's P-S-Y, secure.com. And if you click on the podcast link, you will see I have a Join the Matrix community password. Now, really, that was just there to keep bots out. I don't want them spamming our Matrix community, which, by the way, we have a lot of members in there now. So if you haven't joined the community, please come and join. Now, interestingly enough, I changed the password to the Matrix community on June 21st when the challenge went live. Now, that password was not the code. And just so you know what it is now, it's Ghost Secret. So Ghost with a capital G, Secret, capital S, all one word, and that will unlock the link to the Matrix community. But it's also in the show notes if you just want to be lazy and click on it. Anyway, if you view the source code for the podcast page and scroll down, you will see some JavaScript. And the very first line is a variable, encryption matrix URL equals, and then there is an AES string that needs to be cracked. Now, typically, sites wouldn't use this. They'd use some sort of server-side protection. This is all client-side, and I did this on purpose. The difference being is there's the string, it's encrypted. If you have the password, you can decrypt that string. The question is, where do you decrypt it? So, in the hints on my Capture the Flag challenge, and you can still access this, by the way, it's scysecure.com/CTF, and there's a hint button, and it will recommend a video, rather excellent video that our friend John Hammond put together. I think it's about 3 years old, maybe longer now. It's nothing recent, but he talks about looking at a site's robots.txt. So if you go to any website and do /robots with an s.txt, you will see, and in fact, in my case, you'll see that I'm disallowing the Internet Archive, although that doesn't really work anymore. You have to request that directly. But you can allow or disallow certain web crawlers and also certain pages from being indexed. It's quite useful for hackers because you're looking at pages being disallowed like /admin, things like that. But in my case, there was a page which was /tools/ciphertool.html. So you go to that page and there was a fun, it's still there, a fun cipher tool. It's a tool to decrypt hashes and cryptographic strings, that kind of thing. If you go to the Cipher Tool page, you will be met with a mock system terminal. I had a lot of fun putting this together, but it's actually a fully working dictionary generator and cipher tool, so you could actually use this. Now, in the encryption string box, you can paste that string that you found in the JavaScript on the podcast page. And then there's a number of options. You've got direct decoding or password cracking. Now, in this case, it's not a base 64 hash. It's not ROT13. It's nothing like that. So the default, I was very friendly. I left the default on AES encryption. And then scrolling further down, you have basic settings, word combinations, and advanced settings. And I'll give you the right combination. If you go to combine two words, so there's a little toggle switch, And then smart combinations is on by default. That's fine. It basically combines two words in this dictionary. And then case formatting, if you select mixed case. And indeed, this will work if you just select all of these options. So now you're basically getting it to brute force or just repeatedly try from a list of dictionary words, but also combining words. So privacy guard, secure vault, privacy nerd, that type of thing. Now the default dictionary, and you can see in the mock terminal, it says init dictionary loaded. You can see what that is. You can just type the word dict for dictionary, or on the advanced settings tab, you can actually download that. And this could be useful if you are an ethical hacker. You can download the dictionary after generating some words. There's better ways of doing it, but hey, the tool is a bit of fun. Now, the dictionary has mixed case. It combines two words. If you click the start button, it will say tried about 300 and something passwords tested, depending on the options you selected there, and it failed. It says try and combine words, mixed case, and so on. The key to the challenge was getting the right combination of words. Under advanced settings, there is another feature called harvest words from URL. Now, this uses something called CORS, or cross-origin resource sharing. By default, the browser is going to protect you as the user, if you're on a site, from a CORS attack or this cross-origin attack. You don't want it pulling resources from another site or pulling the contents of a page. So the way around this is I've allowed this through a CORS proxy that I've installed on a server. But to make sure this is safe and not abused, the only sites you can harvest from is example.com, which is actually in the hint on the cipher tool, or my own site, cysecure.com. So if you type in https://cysecure.com and click harvest, that will populate the dictionary with more words. Now, if you hit start, you will crack the password. So the password is ghost secret, but more importantly, the decrypted content should start with HTTPS. And this is HTTPS:// and so on. Basically, it's in the show notes. That's a link to the Matrix community. However, there is a bit at the end, code equals, and then it says, give me the prize 101. So there's the flag that you need to capture. And 3 people found it. For those 3 people, well done. You each have the 6-month subscription to Try Hack Me. I hope you are using it and hope you're enjoying it. And I certainly think we should do a similar challenge in the future, but perhaps with some OSINT. I just need to think about how we do that one. As well as this being a bit of fun, I really wanted to highlight that web security isn't always great. And in fact, I came across a security and privacy policy for a service that I was looking at recently. And it says, we have military grade encryption, AES 256-bit military grade. Well, it might be military grade, but what's the point if it has a weak password or they're not managing the keys properly? And this is something we see time and time again, that these policies and these services will say, we take the security and privacy of our users very seriously. We use military grade encryption. Well, honestly, that's meaningless. It's the same thing as Signal. Signal is actually a very secure messaging app, but not if my phone is not secured. There's no point if I leave my phone at a coffee shop on the table, leave it unlocked, for example. Or, even worse, it's compromised with malware. Same thing with your laptop, same thing with your PC, whatever you use. And quite often, the reason ransomware happens and the reason data breaches happen is not that they didn't encrypt the data. They do, but very poorly managed key management, but also susceptibility to social engineering. So I'm going to leave the Cipher tool up and the Capture the Flag Challenge page. You can check it out. You can rewind this and follow it through, see if you can do that with some guidance. But as always, I love to get some feedback. So you can email me at lockdownpodcast@protonmail.com. And I'd say on top of that, which would be even better, is please come and join our Matrix community. As I mentioned, the link is in the show notes. We have almost 100 members in there now, which is great to see. So please come and join. It's very casual. It's not too heavy. There's a general chat room. There's one on the podcast, and there's a room for introductions, so you can come and say hi. But please do come and join. It's very active. I try and get on there as much as I can. There will be gaps when I'm traveling and doing other activities, but I'm on there quite a lot myself. So it's another good way if you want to message me direct. And of course, as always, there is still the Patreon. So patreon.com/the lockdown if you would like to support the show. And one of the perks is you will get early access to episodes, I'd say 90% of the time. Very rarely I do a recording and then drop the podcast live there and then. Normally it's a few days. So if you want to listen earlier than everyone else, then you can join the Patreon community. And for those that are Patreon members, I really do thank you. Running a podcast is quite expensive, not just for the hosting costs, but just for the equipment and the software that I'm using to record the show. So for that, I'm very grateful. Now, on with the show. And the first topic for today is the military mindset. Now, if you haven't worked this out already, and I'm sure if you put your OSINT and intelligence gathering skills to the test, you will figure out that I am indeed British. Now, back in the UK, you don't see the military culture in the same way it is in the United States. There's certainly no expectation to say to someone in the British Army, thank you for your service. Probably doesn't happen at all. Now, I'm not debating whether that's a good or a bad thing. But the point is, coming from the UK to the US and working in cybersecurity, I've noticed a very strong military mindset. And I was talking recently to a very well-known individual in the cybersecurity world. I'm not going to mention his name, but he said, I've got a military background. He was SWAT trained. He knows firearms. And this was in response to me talking about the open source intelligence, defense and security framework. And my tagline, minimize what can be known. We had a conversation about my privacy techniques. I said my house is in a living trust. I use GrapheneOS. I never use my real name for packages or mail sent to the house. All those things we talk about on the show. But his attitude was quite blunt. And he said to me, if anyone comes to my house, they'll be met with a 9mm. Now, in his mind, security is about having the firepower and the training to respond to threats head on. And this is what we're seeing in cybersecurity. The military mindset is so common in the cybersecurity field that they assume the bad guys are just going to get in, so they have to be prepared to fight back, quite literally. Now, sure, in cybersecurity, we preach assume a breach. We've got to assume that, and we deploy detection and response and recovery tools for when the intruder is inside. But here is a fundamental flaw with that. We're still leaving the doors and windows wide open in the first place. Let me give you an analogy here. Let's imagine a multi-millionaire, perhaps is a CEO of a massive organization, and you may assume that he has bodyguards. He's probably got cameras all over the house, a sophisticated alarm system, steel reinforced doors. Hey, let's go even further. Titanium reinforced doors and hinges, shutters that come down with the press of a panic button. Everything you can possibly imagine for the ultimate security. But if we now look at open source intelligence and I wanted to get into the house, so using reconnaissance, which by the way is the very first stage of the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, we'll talk about that another time, but I do some OSINT and I observe the house. And maybe like in the movies, I could stake out the house. I park in my car just across the street and I've got binoculars and I'm watching housekeeping and lawn maintenance people. Maybe an HVAC guy comes in to do some maintenance, that type of thing. But with OSINT, we don't have to leave our computer. I start looking at their email address, their usernames, and then I find a Google Maps review. And it was for a plant care company. And this CEO, this imaginary CEO we're talking about, has left a review saying, Claire was wonderful. She managed to revive my fig tree. 5 out of 5. Well, now I know there's someone called Claire that works at this plant care company, and this person has a fig tree. With that intelligence, I go to the plant care website and I look at the about page and see the traditional company photo. They're all stood there with their polo shirts on, smiling at the camera. So I go and get a t-shirt made with their logo that I've just stolen off the website, get my t-shirt, put it on, and I look like an employee. I turn up at the house and say, yes, it's plant care company, whatever they're called. And they say, oh, but you've just come last week. And I'll say, oh, that's fine. Claire told me to come in and just check on the fig tree. No charge, just a complimentary visit. Of course, come in. And then I walk straight through the front door. Now, this might seem like an elaborate story, but But this is exactly what is happening in cybersecurity, is despite all of the investments we've put in, social engineering is what gets someone through the front door. And this is not new. I'm not just talking about ransomware groups and the tactics of the past year or two. Kevin Mitnick did this in 1981. I think he was 17 years old at the time, and he and a friend physically entered Pacific Bell's phone data center. It wasn't a data center at the time, but it was in Los Angeles, and it was where the phone networks were. And they used the same tactics as used today, social engineering. They managed to convince a security guard, gain access to the room housing this Cosmos system. You can research this online. But then they gained access. They could steal passwords, steal data, and do very bad things. Kevin Mitnick obviously was made famous for this. And back to what I was saying, this is why we're still leaving the door wide open in the first place. We are just revealing far too much information about ourselves, and this is us as individuals, but as well as organizations, essentially just handing over reconnaissance to the threat actor. It's right there. Now let's go back to this conversation I had. My SWAT friend, very confident that in a direct confrontation, that he could just shoot the perpetrator in the face and as soon as the doors opened. What if he's away on business, which he is very regularly, and it's just his wife and kids at home? A gun in the safe, assuming he has it in the safe, is probably very useless. What if it's not in the safe and an intruder finds the firearm? Wouldn't it be better, and I'm just putting this question out there, wouldn't it be better if the bad guys didn't know where he lived in the first place? Now, I'm not saying this is a fail-safe, but this is the core of my minimize what can be known philosophy and part of the OSINT defense and security framework. Cybersecurity has always been about layered defenses and smart prevention, not just bracing for impact. Look, martial arts is another example. Now, I'm going to reveal probably far too much about me now, but I'm a UFC fan. I don't like sports with a ball in it. UFC is my go-to sport. Now, in martial arts, true self-defense experts are not trained to strike first. Cobra Kai's strike first, strike hard from Karate Kid was fun, but it's not a real-life strategy. Instead, we are taught to avoid and diffuse conflict wherever possible. Now, likewise, in cybersecurity, we need to be reducing the attack surface, so much so that threat actors will struggle to find the target in the first place. Now, on my front door, I have a great big sticker that has the name of a local alarm company. This house is protected by, and then it's a local alarm system company. I do not use that alarm system. I use something else. So that's security by obscurity in a way, but I don't want my house to look like an easy target. Now, unfortunately, so many I've met with military or tactical backgrounds in cybersecurity overlook this preventative layer. I think all layers are needed, don't get me wrong, but they're just focused on things like perimeter firewalls, endpoint detection, incident response, all very important, but completely ignoring the reconnaissance phase. Meanwhile, enterprises are pouring millions and millions on security technology and training. Yet you've got to ask, why do they still get breached over and over again? I believe it's because attackers are still able to quietly gather OSINT on the company's people and its systems and just waltz right through the door without any resistance. And let me present you this other case. There's a hacking group, a ransomware group called Scattered Spider. Now, just for the record, they did not call themselves Scattered Spider. That's something that CrowdStrike did, and the FBI have taken that on. They're actually known as the COM, but I digress. Now, they very recently hit a major retail chain in the UK, Marks and Spencer's. They're also famous for the MGM ransomware breach of 2023 in Las Vegas. How do they do this? It's simply by impersonating employees and contractors using social engineering and, more importantly, details scraped from LinkedIn, corporate websites and social media. They would call up the IT help desk. They'd rattle off enough personal information to sound legitimate and convince staff to install things like TeamViewer or AnyDesk. We call this RMM, remote monitoring and management software. There's a well-known YouTuber that goes by the name of Pierogi. He has a channel called Scammer Payback. And you see time and time again, in fact, every single time, these scammers target victims and convince them to install AnyDesk or TeamViewer or any of those remote access apps. So every organization chart that's posted online or even gathered by companies like ZoomInfo and LinkedIn, every detail of the technology stack because an IT admin has shared it on LinkedIn, the press release, an executive tweet is all fuel for these social engineers. And this is exactly what the open source defense and security framework aims to address, to shrink the digital footprint proactively. Now, as an organization, I'm not saying to come off social media, and this person I was speaking to just didn't get the point. I think he's so indoctrinated into the military mindset, he couldn't understand that I was saying, look, remove things like infrastructure details that the attackers target, remove personal information. The United Healthcare CEO was murdered in New York outside a Hilton hotel. Now, I don't know, I speculate here, but I'm guessing that the suspect knew that he was in that location. And I've seen this a lot where CEOs, company founders, executive teams said, just arrived in, I don't know, San Diego, can't wait for the conference to kick off or can't wait for the investors meeting. I'm not saying don't post that stuff. What I'm saying, post it after the fact. We don't need real-time information of our whereabouts. So I urge anyone listening is to think about this very deeply. Would you not rather prevent the fight entirely than win a fight after taking damage? We can still, if that's what you want to do, keep our 9mm and alarm systems as a backup. But surely the first layer of defense is making ourselves invisible and harder to find. Now, back to privacy, and for you and me, what are we doing to stop the bad guys long before they're at our front door? I really believe it's time that we shift our mindset from this reactive military engagement to intelligent avoidance. Layered defenses means having the fighting skills, but also using stealth and deception, so we don't need to fight at all. Now, if you're young, unlike myself, I would also urge you to look at martial arts. Now, my younger self did martial arts. I did karate. Now, if I could go back to being young again, wouldn't we all? I would probably take up jiu-jitsu or judo, one of those two. I think the ability to avoid kicks and punches to the face and get your attacker to pass out, quite literally in a headlock or another grappling move, is incredibly valuable. So if you are young and you're not doing any form of martial arts, please do it. Check it out. You need to be able to defend yourself. But anyway, I digress again. Now I want to move on to the second topic of today, which is the use of public Wi-Fi. Now, most advice on this topic says don't use public Wi-Fi. You must have a VPN. I've talked about that before, and I think the threat is quite low. I will still use a VPN, but I just want to make the point, if you're not using a VPN, it does not mean these days that people are able to sniff your email password to Proton Mail, for example. It's all encrypted with HTTPS. What it does mean is they could spoof your Google login or the Proton Mail login, and then you give them the password that way. But what I'm talking about today isn't about that. It's about using public Wi-Fi to our advantage. And this is one of the simpler tactics I think we can all leverage, and that's taking advantage of public Wi-Fi in places like Starbucks. Now, if we're setting up any new accounts, such as a new Proton Mail account or VPN account, or perhaps a prepaid SIM, you have to be online. You have to activate it. You have to create an account. And the idea here is straightforward. If you are registering for something like a prepaid mobile plan, a new email address, a VPN service, don't do it from your home internet connection, unless you have VPN already. But let's say you're going to be setting up VPN. Don't reveal your real IP address in the first place. Go to a coffee shop or a library or some other public Wi-Fi and then use that network for sign up. But just make sure that when you use these public Wi-Fi, they're not asking for your real information. So Starbucks, for example, it will ask for your first name, last name, and an email address. Well, I give them a throwaway email address and an alias name. But this way, those services that log the IP address and your location are not logging your home location IP address. That home IP, which can give you an approximate location of where you are, stays out of the picture. So when I connect at, say, Starbucks, I also use my alias name and email address for free Wi-Fi. Now, I'm still trying to convince my family that there is zero benefit to giving coffee shops my real name in return for a latte, and the same goes for the Wi-Fi login. I will use a burner email that's part of my alias identity, and that habit means from the very first moment of creating the new account, I've kept my personal details out of the transaction. So if the coffee shop Wi-Fi provider sells that email, which I assume they're going to do, it's not going to point at me, so I don't care. Now, please bear in mind, you don't want to really give them anything at all, alias or not. That could technically still be traced back to you. An alias name with fastmail or simple login, a court order or some government intervention could certainly reveal your identity. So the best type of public Wi-Fi is the small coffee shop with a Wi-Fi password written on a sticker by the counter. So think of this as the very first step of creating your pseudo or alias identity. The alias name, the alias email, maybe even a secondary phone number using my pseudo, for example, with a VoIP number, are all initially set up far, far away from your home. Now, I've had the advantage over the years of traveling globally. So I would set up in random countries and locations. So I'm really hard to find, always using some free public Wi-Fi. But don't forget, when you connect to Wi-Fi, your MAC address is also visible. So if you really want to be safe, you could use a Wi-Fi adapter, perhaps a USB adapter, and only that, and then do not use it again. You don't want to be continually tying your MAC address to every Wi-Fi access point you connect to. Different type of risk profile, probably out of the scope of today's show, but just something to be mindful of. Now, these days, you already know we're in the situation where we have to opt out of everything. We're opted in by default. And that leads to my next topic, which is curation of data, managing our data trail, and as well as minimizing what can be known, is controlling what they do know about you. So how do you delete yourself from the internet? Well, in my case, I haven't. I'm controlling what's out there. If you want to know what I look like, you just have to Google my name. You will find a YouTube video, a picture of me, an article. I've gone past the point of no return there. My voice can be cloned. You can go to 11 Labs and clone my voice. That has not given you permission to do so, but it's possible. People can do that. But my desire to share the tactics that I implement is greater than not having this podcast out at all. And I'd say the hard truth is we are way past the point of simply opting out now. Data collection is so vast, whether it's public records, social media, credit agencies, data brokers, every random app on your phone. Hopefully you're using GrapheneOS. I'll talk about that later. You just can't realistically hit a big red delete button and everything is gone. My mindset shift is this: focus on curating what is out there. If you can't purge all the data about you, then at least influence what data is floating around. This means intentionally planting or shaping information in ways that protect your true details. Now, one technique is to leverage the very mechanisms that spread our personal information in the first place. So let's start with insurance, for example. You need car insurance, fine, but be aware that if you're going to these sites to get a free quote, that company will very gladly turn around and sell all of that information as sales leads. If you've ever noticed, for example, after shopping for insurance, you start getting bombarded with calls and emails from random agents, it's because your name, contact, and possibly even demographic info is getting packaged and sold, probably within minutes to hours. And this happens when you buy or even inquire about insurance policies, whether that's for your car, home, health insurance, it doesn't matter. So these industries are feeding data into massive data exchanges, one of which is LexisNexis, which maintains such extensive files on individuals, it's scary. So if you open, let's say, renter's insurance today, within a few weeks, that info is going to be aggregated into LexisNexis and shared with who knows how many partners. But we can turn this to our advantage. So let's say today we're going to do some shopping. We're going to get some insurance quotes. We can feed the machine carefully with carefully curated junk. So when I say curate your data, we can choose what information we are going to give out and do it in a way that pollutes data brokers. For example, we could start by getting a car insurance quote. using, and I'm going to leave this up to your imagination, but some curated personal details, a different address, a different phone number. We'll use a my pseudo number. We'll use our real name, but not our real address. Now, I'm talking about insurance quotes from these sites that just do all the searches for you. They gather dozens or if not hundreds of other insurance companies. If they require your social security number, please stop. Because at that point, if you're carrying out insurance, you're technically populating your credit bureau record. So whether that's with Equifax, TransUnion, Experian, when you do that, if you have an address associated, we're getting into a grey area. I'm talking about the data that's sold for junk mail, data brokers potentially going to pick it up, that type of thing. So when that data gets sold and proliferates, and we start getting spam calls to that number and that junk email we gave out, we know it's worked. But more importantly, they don't have our real address. Now, as I've said before, in an ideal world, when you're purchasing a house, you want to put it straight into a revocable living trust, even if it's not for privacy. And I often tell family and friends this, forget privacy. When you eventually die, and we all do, this will avoid probate because the trustees of the trust and the beneficiaries will automatically have your assets that are within that trust. So beyond privacy, it has massive benefits. But from a privacy perspective, if you haven't done this and you've owned your house for several years, it doesn't mean it's too late. You can still put your house in a revocable living trust. Then you have your work cut out because you're going to have to get your data removed. This is where the opt-outs come in from all of the data brokers that are out there. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. Go to inteltechniques.com. Michael Bazell has a free and very excellent list. It's going to take you a long time if you want to do this manually, or you can go to a data broker removal company such as Optory. I wouldn't use Mozilla Monitor. I think they have an opt-out platform because they just white label something else. My philosophy here is this: if data about you is going to be sold anyway, and there's some things you can't do much about, whether you're purchasing a car or car insurance, whatever it may be, then it might as well be the data you have, should I say it, fabricated, rather than the personal details of where you go to bed at night and everything that's going to be used against you should your situation change in the future. We are in an age of abundance as far as data is concerned, so I really think your best defense is to use misinformation, half-truths, even. You don't have to go too extreme. Just misspell a name, for example, a typo in your address. Anything that's going to throw people off the trail. Now, I've got to be careful here. I'm not saying with your own car insurance is to give them a fake address, because they will consider that fraud, because they do use the zip code, for example, to base their risk profile of the car, how much they charge you, and so on. Now, back in episode 3, I talked about the concept of the invisible net, which is this vast, largely unseen network of surveillance that's really cast over all of us. And it's a net that really doesn't care if we are some innocent, law-abiding citizen or a suspect of a criminal gang. If you're in range, you are caught. And I think today, given the state of our political climate and our domestic situation, that the invisible net has only grown tighter and a bit more risky, and being swept up in this mass surveillance can leave very real consequences, even if you've done nothing wrong. So let me explain. In August last year, 2024, during the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, which is an event with heavy political protests, reporters from Wired conducted a small experiment. I'll put a link to this in the show notes. They suspected that law enforcement might be secretly deploying surveillance gear at the event. So they did some investigations, and the result was they uncovered very strong evidence that a Stingray, which is an IMSI, this is a cell site simulator, was operating during the convention. Now, if you're not familiar with Stingrays, these are basically rogue devices that masquerade as a legitimate cell phone tower. Another reason I have a prepaid SIM and an alias name doesn't link back to my identity. So that way your phone, without you knowing, will connect to this cell phone tower. This is how the cell phone network works. So why wouldn't it? You're in range of it. But then it's handing over your device ID, location, metadata, and so on. Now, more importantly, it's doing this to every single phone within its range, unless your phone's in airplane mode and then in a Faraday bag. But if you picture this particular convention, there were thousands of protesters journalists, delegates, random citizens. Maybe I'm on business and I'm having a meeting nearby and I'm just going to a coffee shop. All of the phones got pinged by this fake Stingray device and sucked into the net. There was no warrant, at least none that was evident, but everyone's data got sucked up anyway. So maybe the agency running it was hunting for a specific threat actor in the crowd, or maybe they just wanted to log the information of everyone on site. We don't know, because it's all done in secret. But this effect is very real. Anyone in that area was potentially identified and tracked, simply because they were there. Now, in Wired's report, they talked about Stingrays and other technology that can be used to covertly monitor protesters and suppress dissident behaviour, and how the ambiguity of this use is really chilling to free speech. Now, this is in the United States, mind you. Now, imagine in other parts of the world, it could be even worse. So the invisible net is, you don't see it. You can just be minding your own business, walking along the sidewalk, going to grab lunch, and next thing you know is you're part of a massive surveillance operation. Now, the example I gave in episode 3 was also on a real-life story as well. But the point is, being in the wrong place at the wrong time can happen to you without you even knowing about it. So whether you're near a protest or near a crime scene or in range of some other surveillance operation, you might just get a knock at the door because an algorithm decided that your phone, your device, was of interest, which is why I talk about using GrapheneOS, using a prepaid SIM in an alias name, using public Wi-Fi to register accounts. All of these tactics are there for a reason, and it may sound dystopian, but it really is where we are today. This combination of mass data collection by corporations and by governments and threat actors means we're all just walking around this minefield of anti-privacy surveillance. And I think what bothers me just as much as governments doing this is private organisations getting away with tracking our data and selling it. Which brings me on to one of my favourite topics, which is GrapheneOS, de-googling our phone and using a secure device. Now, I know I talk a lot about GrapheneOS and I have done in previous shows, but it's always worth revisiting because if you're not using GrapheneOS yet, everything we've been discussing so far, whether that's minimize what can be known, defending against active attacks, passive surveillance, all of that, GrapheneOS is all too important to overlook. So for those new to GrapheneOS, let me give you a quick overview. It's a privacy and security focused mobile operating system. It's essentially a hardened version of Android, but with all the Google malware, if I want to say that, or the bloat, removed, or at least sandboxed, while adding a ton of security enhancements. As you will know, I've been running GrapheneOS for many years, and it runs on a Google Pixel device. And yes, I have to use Pixel. Let me explain why. GrapheneOS intentionally only supports Google Pixel phones, and this is by design. Now, I've seen many people ask, well, why not support Samsung or OnePlus or cheaper phone? The reason being is Pixels are uniquely and well suited for high security, despite being Google. Google on security, by the way, is very good. Privacy, not so much. Now, Google allows Pixel owners to unlock the bootloader. This is the important thing here. So now we can flash a custom operating system, in this case GrapheneOS, and then relock the bootloader with our own signing keys, restoring the full verified boot chain. Now, what that means in English, I can install GrapheneOS on a Pixel device and then lock it up tight, or even tighter than it was in the first place, with stock Android. So now no one can tamper with the operating system without me knowing. This is very different to jailbreaking a device. Jailbreaking is something I would avoid unless you are a malware developer or you know what you're doing. That's going to leave you more vulnerable. Now, most other phone manufacturers either don't allow this or have weaker mechanisms. But I'd say in addition, Pixel hardware, especially the more recent generations, has some of the best security architecture in smartphones. So another question I get asked a lot is, why should I use GrapheneOS? Why is that better than stock Android or Lineage OS or Calyx OS, any of these other alternatives? I believe the short answer is because GrapheneOS is far superior in its hardening than the other alternatives. But the important thing here is also the kernel is also hardened as well. So things like memory allocation behavior makes exploits and malware more difficult. In more practical terms, what I love about GrapheneOS is things like the sensors and network access. This can be enabled or disabled per app. There are many apps that do not need to access the internet. Now, as you know, in previous shows, I've talked about Little Snitch for MacBooks or Simple Wall if you're using Windows. And I think regardless of what device you're using, whether it's your mobile device, a laptop, a desktop OS, it doesn't matter. You should have the ability to allow internet access per process, or at least per application. And this is built in to GrapheneOS. Now, it's a long list, but the point here is GrapheneOS's default state is far more locked down against remote exploits and spyware than any other device. Now, I want to break down some key aspects of why I personally use GrapheneOS and why I think this is important for our privacy. So number one, in my main profile, I have no Google apps. Now, my daily driver, this is the main profile, has no Google apps at all. Now, GrapheneOS doesn't come pre-installed with anything by Google by default, which is wonderful. So if I absolutely need a Google app, let's say I want Google Maps, I do not install that to my main profile. Instead, I'll create a separate Google user profile on the device. And by the way, in GrapheneOS, user profiles are completely isolated environments, and it separates storage, separate app installations. There's no crosstalk between profiles unless you specifically allow it. And GrapheneOS has actually increased the maximum number of profiles. I think it's 32, correct me if I'm wrong. I think stock Android is about 4. So in my Google profile, this is a user profile, I have the sandboxed Google Play services and a few Google dependent apps just in case I need it. But that's great because then I have to intentionally switch from one profile to the other. And even then, it's not logged in to an account. That's a really important thing to note. Now, what I like as well about GrapheneOS, by default, it's going to shut down any background profile apps when you switch profiles. So it effectively silences Google's surveillance when you're not using the profile. Now, in my main profile, I do have Google Play services. That's sandboxed, but I'm not using any Google apps. And the reason I use that is just for compatibility and notifications. Without that, I'm going to get delayed notifications. It can cause a bit of hassle. So, I'm trying to strike a balance, but I'm certainly not installing any other Google apps and not logged into Google. That's my biggest advice. Do not log in to Google because they will know the device. Application sandboxing and permissions. Every app on GrapheneOS is sandboxed. As I mentioned before, I can disable an app's network access. So it has no access to the internet, can't access my network. And what I also like is apps by default run in the background unless I specifically give them permission to do so. So if you're using GrapheneOS, if you just scroll down from the top and then scroll down again to get, I don't know what you call it, all the controls, at the very bottom it will say something like 4 apps are active. This is what I click on mine. So if I look at mine, I have an audiobook player. I allow that to run in the background, but it has no network access. And I have a few other apps here, but again, they're allowed to run in the background, but there's no access. But there's no other apps. This is the important thing. No other apps are allowed to run in the background. Unlike an iPhone, where goodness knows what processes are going on in the background. And this is what I love. If I open, let's say, an app for my coffee machine, I think I've told you I have an app for my coffee machine, and I can control what it has access to. And when I close it, GrapheneOS will keep it from staying active. It completely closes it down, which is why if you have something like Signal Messenger, you want to allow it to run in the background. Otherwise, you're going to complain and say, well, my notifications aren't coming in until I open the app. That is the point. That's by design. That's what we want. Now, I mentioned Google Play services. I want to just talk about this a bit more. So there's sandboxed Google Play. Now, this is when it's used. Now, as I mentioned earlier, so GrapheneOS allows you to install the official Google packages for Play services, the Play Store, and a few other things, but then treat them as normal apps. So they run user level with no special access to the device. That's the first thing that's important. And applications that need to see Google Play services do so within that profile. But Google's processes can't read your contacts or your location unless you grant it permissions. You even have a settings panel to configure Google Play services or the sandboxed Play services, including a toggle to reroute location requests. Now, by default, If an app asks Google Play for a location, GrapheneOS is going to intercept that, it's a proxy, and then hand the app your device's own GPS location from the operating system instead of letting Google do it. Now, Google are excellent at location services. I wonder why. It's very accurate. If you're in a shopping mall, it's going to know exactly where you are. The downside, if you're using a map application and you're indoors, it won't know where you are. It needs GPS access, but that's what I like. I physically have to go outside or at least by a window to see where I am on the map. Now, if you have a user profile where you have Google Maps, for example, as I said before, do not log in. And this is why. If you log into a Google account with Google Play services on the phone, on GrapheneOS, then any app in that profile that uses Google's login, this is OAuth, can prompt you to select that account and then bing, you've been logged in. So apps like Uber, Airbnb, ChatGPT, they all offer this login with Google for convenience. So if your phone's Google services are signed into the Google account, those apps can leverage it, which is why I do not log into Google, because this is essentially tying your identity across different services. If you have the sandboxed Google Play services installed, do not log in. If you have to log in, then I would use an alias and do it from a different user profile. We talked about that. And listen, look, GrapheneOS isn't magic. It does not make you invisible or invincible to tracking or exploits, but it significantly reduces the risk of having that happen. Your phone with GrapheneOS really becomes much harder to crack and a far less noisy source of data. Now, a lot of attacks or tracking that could happen on, say, a Samsung Galaxy or other Android phone will not work on GrapheneOS. And if you combine GrapheneOS with some smart practices, like don't install some random game or sketchy app, use VPN, and use a prepaid SIM and an alias, then you're really embracing the minimize what can be known motto. Now, everything we've discussed today boils down to a common theme, and that's being intentional about your security and privacy. So whether it's your online footprint, your home defense plan, your use of public networks, the phone in your pocket, whatever it is, the goal is to minimize what can be known about you and those around you. I think one of the frustrations we all share are family members. I have a family member that seems to love saying happy birthday on social media, but as an OSINT practitioner, that's probably the easiest way to get someone's date of birth, is you look through not their social media profile, but the grandparents, their parents, for example, because they're the ones that are always going to say, happy birthday, Jack, and then you know their date of birth. Okay, I've been talking for far too long. We're coming up to an hour. So let's end the show there. Again, if you have any topics or suggestions, ideas for the show, anything you want to discuss, you can email me, lockdownpodcast@protonmail.com, or you can come and join me in the Matrix community. The link for that is in the show notes. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep going. Keep fighting the system. And it's not a one and done activity. You will achieve a far better privacy posture than anyone else if you just keep at it. Talk soon.
Listen, I stopped by at the City Hall on my way home tonight and had a look at the record section. Needless to say, I was quite unable to find any reference to us being the occupiers at this address. When I asked the staff, they said we'd moved to another area.
Is that right? Well, I suppose we should be grateful they didn't think that we were dead. Financially speaking, we may as well be dead. We haven't got enough to see us through this month. Well, I guess we just have to wait and see what they decide to do next.